16-note accent is a very tricky exercise to get with your feet. If the previous exercise we talked about, two-note timing is one of the more advanced rhythmic concepts in here, 16th-note accent is probably the most tricky to play perfectly with a metronome with those feet marking time. So the battery candidates are especially going to want to look at the breakdown that I create next because I think that's really going to help you. But honestly, everybody tends to struggle with this one, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But once you've mastered it and you've practiced it, broken down, I highly recommend working with the practice track here and listening to yourself recorded to make sure that your tap height stays consistent throughout. So let's take a look, rather than diving into the exercise, let's look at a breakdown that would be smarter to start with. So this exercise is the 16th note accent breakdown, and it's basically just a simplification of 16th note accent. So what we do is we isolate only the right hands. And if we thought about only the right hands in the first measure, it just creates accents and taps. This is something that you might hear me occasionally refer to as bucks, which is something that people call just accents and taps over and over. All right. Then the next pattern, if we isolated just the right hands, or actually not, we're looking at a more complicated version of that, but if we isolated just the right hands, we would just have taps, right? And then the next part would be upbeat bucks, right? So we have upbeat bucks. And then finally we have eighth notes only, again, if we just looked at the right hand, all right? And what this breakdown exercise does is it takes a look at adding the left hand in between. So you can see, I'm just trying to clean this screen up so you're not looking at so much junk. So if you take a look here, I'm going to use my highlighter. We still have our eighth notes, but they're interrupted by a left hand, right? And same thing here. We still have our eighth notes, but they're interrupted by our left hand. So the way I would practice this is playing right hand taps. So if I'm isolating my second measure, I'd play a measure of right hand taps, and then I'd add in that left hand, and then I'd just do some right hand taps, and I'd add in that left hand, right? And then I'd look at the fourth measure, just play some right hand taps, right? And I would practice that, and as soon as I knew I had that, then I would go back and I would do in order measures 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the downbeat, and I'd really work on getting my feet locked in with all that, right? So clearly where your feet line up is going to be critical in this one, and if you can play and mark time to this breakdown exercise, then you are going to find it so much easier to play and mark time to the real thing. So let's get into the real thing now. Now that we've looked at the breakdown, we can get into the real thing. So what I would recommend in the real thing is still, once we've mastered the breakdown, we're not quite ready for the real thing yet. And this, what I would do is I'm bracketing off the fours, right? And I'm looking at each individual measure, and I would do a measure of check in between each measure, right? So that let me get my hands moving. So right, left, 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 right, left. Then I do the accents 3 and 4, and then no accents, just check. Then we do the second measure. And what that'll help you do if you do that is really make sure that you get your feet moving appropriately. And if you get off a little bit, you can fix it in that check measure. Okay, because as soon as we get into practicing 16-note accent, as is, it's going to be really easy to make a mistake. And I'm going to point out exactly what that mistake will likely be. All right? You're probably going to be just fine in measure 1. Right? We've been playing accents and tapping our feet for a long time. But measure 2 is where it's going to get awkward. And I'm trying to mark the beat here so you can see clearly that it happens right prior to that left accent. And what happens for most young percussionists is they like to get that left hand E on the beat. So what I would really focus on is that relationship of foot hand, foot hand, foot hand, foot hand. That's a really critical relationship, and just to isolate that would be a very smart way to do it. But that isn't alone where it stops, because really the transition into the third measure is also tricky. So we go from foot hand, foot hand, foot hand, foot hand to foot hand, foot hand, foot hand, foot hand, right? To having some space between the beat and the upbeat. So these two bars, when you're practicing, are going to be critical to make sure that you can play. And that's for the mark timers and the non-mark timers. We are not used to playing rhythms that are on the E of a beat. We're not as comfortable with it as we are on the beat and on the and. Right? These are things that we listen to in music on a daily basis, right? Even in pop music, but playing on the E, not so much. Okay, so I'd really take a look at those two bars and trying to get them. The next thing is making sure, in terms of like pitfalls to work on. Obviously, mark time is huge, but then making sure that it's either an even tap or it's an accent. It's black and white, right? It either has to be all low or it has to be that accent and then right back to low. What happens with a lot of people is when they start to play their accent, they don't get back down. They don't get the stick down, so their tap is too high, and they kind of get like a three-heighted exercise instead of two. So we really want to focus on the black and whiteness of this exercise. It's either up or it's down. And then in terms of the 4-2-1s, it's pretty straightforward. Once you can master the fours, the twos twice isn't too tricky, and then the ones actually feel a little bit pretty natural to play. It's just a matter of keeping your taps down and not letting it get out of control. So making sure that we hear the accent versus the tap. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1, right? Not letting things creep up. So now that we've talked about it in detail, let's watch a video demonstration.